Not the audio, but just,
Yeah.
Um, no, I guess Chip's not waiting. Anyway,
Yeah.
you want to run through this?
Yeah, we ought to. Yep.
Okay, so you're going to start.
Yep.
Welcome everybody, that type of thing. I'm going to do a quick 20-second reminder for folks that Circle of Fellows is up,
Yep.
even though I had nothing to do with it because I was on vacation.
Yeah.
I'll do the polite mail promo and the first article, the first story. I am deliberately keeping my second two very short because I'm going to take a little time with this one.
Okay.
This is just big tech behaving badly. So the stories here start with and my favorite headline of the month. Tim Cook says employees who leak memos do not believe at Apple, according to leaked memo.
Yeah, I saw that.
But then Apple and Google removing the app in Russia that would have helped the opposition because Putin told them to, and they just caved. And that is leading to some blowback from employees, particularly at Google. So I'm going to get through that. Then I'm going to jump into Facebook with the Wall Street Journal expose of the memos that they uncovered from inside Facebook.
Sure.
And Facebook's absolutely shameful response to that, and also the approach they're taking to PR now. I don't know if you read, they're actually inject feeds positive stories about Facebook.
Yep, I did. We actually discussed Facebook in the 50th anniversary episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, mention that. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to promote that on here.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to cover those. It'll take a bit. And like I say, I'm deliberately keeping my other two short to compensate for that.
Okay.
So then you've got the Gartner hype cycle, always interesting.
Yeah, I'll highlight the pointers made in the Gartner article. I'm not going to reference the ZDNet one, but the Gartner piece. I'm going to actually talk a little bit about the actual chart they produce each year. And this time it doesn't go beyond the peak of inflated expectations. There's no dots showing anywhere on the plateau and all that. But it's interesting to me, certainly, and I think some of the listeners, some folks listening would be interested too, just talking a bit about some of the things on the innovation trigger and the kind of expectation of how many years. But I'm just going to highlight some of the things. I mean, my message really with this and with the other one is this: communicators need to pay attention to this. And it reminded me of when I wrote a blog post back in 2006 when this came out. I remember saying communicators need to pay attention to these innovations, and it's valuable to get some insights into this. Of course, the detailed report has the detail, but that's a serious amount of money. And I think if people work for large organizations, they should ask their IT folks if they can see a copy. And that's the better way of doing it. But anyway, I'll highlight that and then talk. And the next one I'll talk about in a similar
the IT,
fashion.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I was. I saw NFTs exactly where I expected them to be on the hype cycle.
Right at the peak. Right
at the peak.
Yeah.
It was what I found interesting was to see employee communication applications.
I'm
going to mention that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that too. So
okay.
I'll mention that as one of the examples that I want to reference. There's three things I'm going to talk about as an example, and that's one of them.
Okay.
Which, in fact, I was going to do it saying, hey, this will interest you, Shel, and no doubt you've got more to say about it. So you definitely do that.
Yeah, I mean, I see positive results, positive outcomes from the use of those applications. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when it slides over to the trough.
Yeah.
Okay. The story from the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times. Meme lords taking over the C-suite.
Wall Street
Journal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have some story in here on the New York Times. Meme lords taking over the C-suite. I find this particularly interesting given the conversations we were having 10 years ago about how you had to drag CEOs kicking and screaming to be on social media at all.
Yeah.
And now you've got these, celebrity CEOs or celebrity CEO wannabes who are doing memes specifically to go viral and to move the markets.
Things have changed.
Yeah, it certainly has. So just going to do a quick overview of that.
Okay.
All right, so then we've got Dan.
Yeah, I saw the email literally just before I got online, so I've not had a chance to listen to that yet. So
I listened to it. He covers a whole.
Yeah, I saw the email he sent listing all that he talked about. Yeah.
A whole range of stuff. So when we jump out of that, is there anything worth talking about? Oh yeah, he has started a newsletter on Review, which is a Twitter property.
Yeah.
So when you go see his profile on Twitter, it includes the opportunity to subscribe to the newsletter right there.
Okay.
So I'll just mention that I subscribed. I went and looked at his profile to see what that looked like, and I said, "Oh, what the hell? I'll go ahead and subscribe."
Yeah.
All right. So then you've got the artificial intelligence.
Yep.
And I was happy to see chatbots on its way to the slope of enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll do that in a similar manner. Actually, where's my notes on it? What I tended to do. What was I going to focus on that one? AI is moving faster. Yeah, it's a Tech Republic article I'm going to refer to, not Gartner's piece. Actually, is seriously complicated sometimes, and that's not our audience. So this one though is to complete the chart, i.e., it shows stuff in the trough and out on the well. Actually, there's nothing on the plateau yet. It's getting there. So I'll pick a couple to highlight, but I'm going to mention a couple of the summaries in this article that are quotes from the folks at Gartner who did it. On the just going back to the emerging tech, I actually attended the Gartner webinar they did on that. I was truly astonished by how poor it was. Truly poor. The guy who gave the presentation is the author, and you should keep him away from giving webinars. This guy, he was really not good at all. And he just read the slides. I mean, literally. So he needs some help. I was disappointed with that. But anyway, on this, I'll just talk a bit about some of the key takeaways from it, because it's lengthy, and this is not the point of sharing this with people. I want to mention this also in the context of the two documents, the UK government strategy, and I don't know if there's a US government one. Surely there must be, but I can't find it anywhere. Instead, I found this piece from this private organization who set out a kind of thought piece on what strategy should be. So I'm sure they have one, because I'm sure they do. But it was good seeing this. So I'll talk a bit about the UK government one.
Good. Okay, then I've got this article on why people tune out bad news.
Okay.
This is a Harvard School bit of research. And I found it interesting because the way they define bad news, it's not like we're having a layoff or something like that. This is, you hear that car exhaust is bad for the environment. Are you going to stop driving a fossil fuel driven vehicle? No, you ignore that, right? Because you don't want to have to make a painful change. But then they did a second round of research around things that were less impactful about you, but you could go get more information, and you still avoid the bad news, either because you're lazy or what have you. And I was thinking about this in terms of internal communications, where we're trying to get people to take accountability for things. And if this translates to internal, and I can't imagine that it doesn't, I think it changes the calculus immensely about how we communicate. We can't expect people to say, I'm a dedicated employee of this company, and here's a bad situation, and I have to take some responsibility for helping the organization change it. No, I just want to keep doing things the way I've been doing them, and therefore I'm going to ignore this. So I'm still giving some thought about how to make that change. What do we do to drive that information home when people are inclined to ignore it? But I'm going to write a post about it. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. definitely.
While I'm there, I'm going to take just a minute to share the results of the Pew 2021 report on how people get their news
Okay.
on social media. And just literally 20 seconds. But because we're talking about, people ignoring the news, where are they getting it? Well, half of them are getting it from social media. So,
Yeah. Okay.
all right, then you've got this great story on the gap between leaders and everybody else on how great our culture is doing.
That's the focus for me. It's clearly the leadership and senior folks in an organization believe one thing, and the folks who are at the coalface, as it were, the regular employees, see a different picture entirely.
Yeah.
So that's worth referencing. I'll probably quote quite a few of the statistics out of the report. There's lots of percentages, so I'll speak slowly when I do that. But I think one thing I'm not agree with at all is the conclusions they include in the piece from the CEO of this institute that did the survey. Basically saying that, well, it's understandable, this kind of thing, because we had a pandemic and people who have been, leaders have been so tied up with taking care of that they haven't touched on culture. Well, that's bullshit, I think, frankly. But
well, yeah, especially since culture has been dramatically affected by the pandemic.
Right. So, I may not even mention any of that. I'm just going to give the headline numbers. I don't think culture is something you can design in the way it seems that one of the kind of takeoffs you could read from this article. It's not something you pull off a shelf. I mean, that maybe I might talk about that a bit, because here you've got a huge disconnect, it seems to me, across companies in North America. I did ask some friends of mine, or acquaintances, I should really say, in business, do you see this picture in the UK? And the answer was no, they don't. It doesn't mean to say it's not the case. This is not the scientific sampling I did. Because I then asked broadly on Twitter, is this the same picture in the UK? I didn't hear from anyone with any comments on it. So I may mention that, actually. So this is a US picture specifically, but nevertheless it raises some interesting issues. That's it, really.
Just turning off my phones so they don't make noise. Okay, great.
Now, just noticing, I didn't read that originally, the date you saying we should record. October.
Oh, yeah. Does that work for you? I meant to ask.
Yeah, I'm going to have a look. October.
So we'd record on the 16th.
Yep, that weekend's fine.
Okay, good, because the next weekend is not good for me.
No, me neither. Nor the prior weekend. So the 17th, 16th, 17th weekend is fine.
Okay, great.
Good.
And let me add that to the calendar, or as you would say, the diary.
Yeah, that works.
I didn't add it because I wanted to make sure it worked for you first.
Yeah, that's cool. Do we have anyone in the YouTube channel?
Not last I saw. Nope.
I can't see, as I say every time we record this, I can't see the YouTube channel.
Is Arsenal playing today?
I have no idea, because I'm not a football fan, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
That would explain it, wouldn't it?
That would explain it. Yeah, probably.
Okay.
I would imagine. But
so I assume we'll have no commentary from
probably
the
not.
Peanut Gallery.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have your audio recorder up?
I do. Let me just hang on a sec. Yeah, I do. Have I got it in the right place? No, I've got it in the wrong place. Hold on. That's it. Yeah, that's a weird thing with this Windows recorder. If you minimize the width, it doesn't show the record button. It shows a play button only. But you could get confused and press that and think you're recording.
Yeah.
That's not good.
I'm still just using Audition.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to load up Audition. I just want to record this, and it's good enough.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just move the microphone a little bit better. That's it. Okay, let me see. So we're going to do a 3, 2, 1?
Yep. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hi everybody, and welcome to, for immediate release, the Hobson and Holtz Report. This is show number 211 actually, and we're recording this for the 2021 edition. I'm Neville Hobson, speaking to you from Thatcham in England.
And this is Shel Holtz in Concord, California. As Neville says, welcome everybody. We have an interesting collection of stories today, and Dan York has an interesting collection of topics that he's going to address in his report as well. Before we get started, I do want to mention that the latest episode of Circle of Fellows is now available on the FIR Podcast Network. This is featuring a collection of IABC fellows talking about an issue or topic of interest to communicators. This one is communicating in a changing workforce. Now, I was on vacation when this was recorded, so Brad Whitworth took on the moderator position, and the panel included Priya Bates, Adrian Cropley from Australia, Ritzi Ronquillo from the Philippines, and Jennifer Waugh from Canada. Of course, Priya is also from Canada, so truly an international panel. It was recorded at 7 p.m. Eastern time to accommodate all of those time zone changes. It's a really interesting conversation. As I say, it's now available on the FIR Podcast Network. Also, before we jump into our stories, I do want to take a moment to share some information about our sponsor, Polite Mail. As I mentioned a minute ago, I was on vacation a week before last. Now, having worked for myself for a couple decades, I got accustomed to checking my email every day when I was on vacation, and my wife got used to me doing it. First, if something blew up with a client, there was nobody else to deal with it. But even more pressing for me was this idea of coming home to hundreds and hundreds of emails. I'd rather take a half hour a day and just be caught up when I get home. But over on the Polite Mail blog, there's a post for all of you, regular people about how to deal with email when you get back from vacation. And it's not to be one of the 17% of survey respondents who said that they just mark it all as read. The post covers preparing your inbox before you leave, and that included a great suggestion that I had never considered: extending your away message one day longer than your trip, and using that day, your first day back on the office, as a day of catch-up when people aren't hitting you with emails knowing that you're back. Once you are back, the post offers 3 ways to clear your inbox quickly, starting with identifying your priority people, then sorting your inbox by sender instead of date. You drag all those priority folks into a priority folder, then clean out the crap and bulk process what remains. Now, the post goes into a lot of detail, and the link to the post is in the show notes. And while you're there, take a look at Polite Mail, because using Polite Mail will elevate your internal email communications a whole bunch and make it significantly easier to assess and improve the performance of those emails. And it's all managed in an Outlook plugin, so you never have to log into a website and deal with all the mishigas you get with other services that keep all their tools in the cloud. You'll find all of this at politemail.com, and as ever, we thank Polite Mail for their support of For Immediate Release. So let's jump into our first story, which is about tech behaving badly, big tech behaving badly. The news has been full the last couple of weeks with tales of big tech companies making what I think, and Neville, I will look forward to hearing your thoughts, see if you agree, making some terrible decisions and dealing with some troubling revelations, all of which must have their PR teams just cringing. In most of these cases, these companies' actions have been accompanied by a ramping up of employee activism, which continues to grow. Now, the best example of employee activism is covered in a story on The Verge that has the headline of the month. The headline reads, "Tim Cook says employees who leak memos do not belong at Apple, according to leaked memo." I just love that. It's just so rich with irony. In the email to employees about an all-hands meeting that was leaked, Cook said that Apple was doing everything in our power to identify those who have leaked, and that people who leak confidential information do not belong at Apple. The memo he was talking about let employees know that Apple was going to require frequent COVID testing for unvaccinated employees, but would stop short of a vaccine mandate. Another one dealt with the Epic versus Apple antitrust case, which was a split decision for Apple and Epic over Apple's vice-like control of its App Store. Now, about that App Store, Apple and Google both made headlines when they bowed to Russian President Vladimir Putin and removed an app from their respective stores. The app was called Smart Voting. It was a tool for organizing opposition to Putin as Russians headed to the polls last weekend. Smart Voting was developed by Alexei Navalny's organization. He's the opposition leader who was poisoned, survived, and was then thrown into prison by Putin. There's a Penn State University professor who studies online censorship who called this capitulation a poster child for political oppression, and that Google and Apple have, quote, bolstered the probability of this happening again. YouTube, which Google, of course, owns, also pulled videos from opposition candidates, and Google Docs pulled documents that listed candidates endorsed by Smart Voting, all at Putin's request, or maybe I should say, all at Putin's demand. Now, one person with knowledge of the matter said that Google faced legal demands by regulators and threats of criminal prosecution if it failed to comply, but, you know, they could always just pull out of Russia rather than be part of this. It's not like they're making tons of money there. Russia spends about $4 billion a year on advertising. That's not $4 billion a year of advertising on Google. That's $4 billion a year on advertising everywhere, all the advertising put together. You'll find more than that in the cushions of chairs and couches in Google lobbies around the world. This is a small drop in Google's overall bucket. And of course, Google's employees have been scathing in their condemnation of the company's cave into Putin's anti-democratic actions. They've been posting internal messages and images. They're not happy about it. Apple appears to be even a little more hypocritical, given that you can go to their website and find a document called Commitment to Human Rights. Although if you pay attention to the fine print, it does say that the company will obey governments when government orders are at odds with human rights. I'm just at a loss over this. All of this happened while global internet freedom declined for the fifth year in a row and is under, quote, unprecedented strain, according to one report, as more nations arrested internet users for nonviolent political, social, or religious speech than ever before. And Alexei Navalny, as he sits in a prison cell, he is considering suing Google and Apple over. It'll be a good look for Apple and Google. But compared to Facebook, Apple and Google look downright cherubic. In the past, when Facebook was caught doing something awful, their playbook called for them to be all contrite. They apologized and they promised to do better. This was their mantra. We're promising to do better. And then they, of course, didn't. But that's apparently gone out the window in the wake of the Wall Street Journal's blockbuster reporting on some internal research that the journal exposed, a lot of which was very damning. The report found the company held high-profile people to different standards than you and me, that they're aware of the risks that Instagram poses to teen users and are doing nothing about it, that a change to its algorithms failed badly, that they aren't doing a good job with dangerous content, and that they've allowed anti-vaxxers to abuse the platform. This is all internal research. And what have you heard about them doing about it? Well, Facebook's VP of Global Affairs, a name I'm sure familiar to you, Neville, Nick Clegg, has just shrugged it all off. Part of his statement said, "We fundamentally reject this mischaracterization of our work and impugning of the company's motives." So how does Facebook plan to deal with these issues moving forward? With the kind of PR that any ethical practitioner would tell you is a complete violation of PR ethics. First, they tried using the Facebook newsfeed to showcase positive stories about Facebook. Yep, that algorithm that's supposed to show you more of what you like was to be used surreptitiously to present Facebook in the best possible light. This was called Project Amplify, a notion so audacious that even several Facebook executives were shocked by it. Well, that didn't make much headway. They did do something similar along with other things. They've been working aggressively to distance Mark Zuckerberg from scandals. They've worked to reduce outsiders' access to internal data, and they've tried to make Zuck into some kind of tech visionary who is above the damage that his company's doing. Rather than apologize and promise to do better when things go south, they're just denying any culpability. Now, we'll have a link in the show notes to the New York Times report on Facebook's communication efforts. But throwing up obstacles to being able to analyze Facebook data is particularly troublesome. There was one law professor who said, it's inconceivable that most of modern life as it exists on Facebook is not analyzable by researchers. And now they're pushing positive press about Facebook with a system called Quick Promotes. This places positive stories about people and organizations that have used Facebook into our news feeds. Seeing posts with a Facebook logo that will link to stories and websites published by the company and third-party local news sites, like one that had a headline, Facebook's latest innovations for 2021. I don't know where this is all headed, Neville, but it doesn't seem good. It seems anti-democratic and an absolute violation of ethical behavior.
Yeah, I suspect you're right with that last part, Shel, violation of ethical behaviour. Thing is, though, I think, isn't this, this is not new. None of this is new. This is how they behave. And we collectively, all of us, let them get away with it. And therein is, just looking at my notes here, Tim Cook says employees with memos don't belong at Apple. Okay. So what are you going to do about that? No, I mean the Facebook thing. I originally had no words. I read the Wall Street Journal piece. I read Nick Clegg's response. And by the way, Nick Clegg, for our listeners in the US who don't know this, he was the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK in the early part of this past decade. And so he's got a communications background. He's in charge of global public affairs at Facebook. He's the guy who writes this kind of stuff, or rather whose name is attached to this kind of article that we saw, defending what they were doing and criticizing the Wall Street Journal. So that's the one that's in my mind more than any other, because it's something that's A, I'm not surprised. B, I don't see anything happening as a consequence of it, truly. I mean, the European Union have fined Facebook. Actually, no, it was Google. I forgot who it was who was fined now, actually. But I don't believe that will make a difference to anything, because they're not going to pay the money. They'll tie it up in lawyers for years. So nothing changes. Forgive my cynicism, but I don't believe this will make a blind bit of difference to anything. Nevertheless, your points are valid. I think it is unethical. I think it is disgraceful the way they just, with plausible deniability, everything they do. Interestingly, I found was the reaction to Facebook's response to the Wall Street Journal piece, Nick Clegg's piece. TechMeme gathered a beautiful collection of tweets from people. There are hundreds, absolutely hundreds. I grabbed it the day after it appeared, and that's now lots more has happened since then. But I want to just mention a couple of them because these resonate big time.
I can't wait to hear, because I didn't see that.
Yeah, these are people ranging from folks just like you and me, Shel, to very influential voices who are well known internationally, to let's call them internet celebrities. I mean, you name it. Prominent journalists, both sides of the Atlantic. So the first one I thought was great. And by the way, most of these are using their Twitter handles. I don't know what the real names are, but anyway, so this one says, "No, Nick Clegg, your take," see screenshot, "is the opposite of the actual takeaway. The series doesn't impugn hardworking employees who want to make Facebook better. It impugns leadership for repeatedly lying about what FB knows and for business decisions they knew were bad." Next, "This company is a blight on humanity." This is from Julia Carey Wong. I've heard of her. I've seen her talk a lot about Facebook. "This company is a blight on humanity. It's rotten through and through. Good people go to work for it and try to reform it, and they either get corrupted by the money or chewed up and spat out. It cannot be fixed." So my thought on that was, don't mince words here. Tell us what you really think. Another one, "I've now heard from a number of current and former FB researchers who are deeply offended, not by the Wall Street Journal's reporting, but Facebook's official statement via Nick Clegg." I mean, that's a pretty pokey one, that one is. Another one, "How dare you impugn the purity of our motives just because we happen to be very rich," says one person. Another one, "Clegg pretty clearly was hired to protect Sandberg and Zuckerberg as much as Facebook Incorporated. His post demonstrates that." Another, big tech is the new big tobacco. They are harming our kids for profit. Another one, this thread from Nick Clegg is disappointing. He suggests Wall Street Journal is attacking Facebook staff. That's nonsense. Facebook staff were producing this data to warn leadership. It leaked because they were ignored. The problem is greedy, indifferent, immoral leadership. And that focus is peppered throughout all the comments here. This is not Facebook. This is the leadership of Facebook, specifically Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. It's interesting because we talked about this very topic, that Sam Knowles and Thomas Stoker and I, in the episode of the Small Data Forum podcast that I co-host. And we got together literally Thursday, 2 days ago, as we're recording this, in London, face to face. First time we've done that for 2 years, to record it live. And we had a nice lunch, and then we gathered in a place that was a bit quieter to do the recording. And we talked about this. And I think it's much of what you said came up in our discussion. So we have a commonality of focus on what's wrong here. And I think it's interesting that Facebook, and again, I'm focusing on Facebook because it's in my mind a lot, that I don't believe this will make a blind bit of difference to anything without. I mean, thinking back to that earlier comment from the person who says, Facebook's irredeemable. There's nothing can change here, unless, and there's an unless here, unless something happens to make a change. And that's the bit that worries me more than anything, Shel, because that typically means if governments get involved and the word regulation comes up, and it's just the government's doing it, then it's going to be an outcome that is not good at all. It may fix this particular problem, but it won't be good for all of us who use social media and have the freedom of expression and privacy issues in our minds that tend to go by the wayside, or potentially could. This needs to involve wider stakeholders in any kind of work here. I'm also reminded of the book by Charles Arthur, a journalist here in the UK who writes for The Guardian, amongst other publications. He published a book called Social Warming that I wrote a post about. It was involved in discussion. You joined it. I can't remember whether we mentioned it in the last show, because I think it was just before.
We did.
Yeah, we did. Okay. Yeah. That talked a lot about Facebook. And indeed, we touched on that too, particularly the example of what Facebook did in Myanmar. It used to be called Burma. It's a country in Southeast Asia that introduced a communication method to a society that had never known anything like it. And the negative effects of that have been absolutely extraordinary. So the book's worth a read, just to read the history of that and discover things. So Facebook, by all accounts, or by many accounts, I should say, is an untrustworthy organization, and all of us should leave. So why don't we then? Therein lies the issue. Why don't I leave? I use Facebook. I use it a lot. I talk to my family. I talk to friends in private channels. I have my timeline set to friends only. It's not public. I belong to half a dozen groups, all of which are private, and most of which I value hugely. And if they vanished, then I wouldn't have access to those people or the topics we talk about. So how does that fit with what I think about Facebook? And therein is a big dilemma for many. Could it be a simple thing like, well, it doesn't affect me personally? That's a bit of a cop-out statement, but is that the reason? I honestly don't know why I don't leave. Do I feel strongly enough? That's possibly a clue to why. No, I don't. I feel no compulsion to leave. I don't feel outraged that I'm going to go there and take my firebrand and my pitchfork and storm Facebook's premises and say, out, you evil people, I'm leaving you. No one's doing that. So we've talked about this before, Shel. What'll make a change? Will it be the day all the advertisers desert Facebook? Probably, but they're not doing that, are they?
No, and it's because it's not the Ford Motor Companies and Apple Computers of the world that are driving the ad sales. It's the small businesses that can reach local customers and don't have any alternatives other than Google ad sales, which is kind of the same boat these days. Yeah. I listened to a talk show host here in the Bay Area named Chip Franklin. He had a tweet the other day, said, "Are you still on Facebook?" And I replied, and the answer is the same as the one that I've given here on the show before. First of all, like you, I'm in several private groups that are highly valuable to me that are not going to be replicable elsewhere. I am in contact with family members with whom I had lost contact for decades.
Yeah.
And only was able to find them and reestablish contact through Facebook. There is no other social network that has so many people on it that you can be reasonably assured that 3/4 of your family are there. So what's it going to take? It's going to take a change of leadership, which is not coming to Facebook because Mark Zuckerberg has consolidated his power and the board cannot vote him out. He has too many votes on the board to keep that from happening. People aren't going to leave because there isn't an alternative that allows them to do these things that are important to them. Advertisers aren't going to leave because these small businesses don't have an alternative. So what's it going to take? I'm afraid it is going to be government regulation. And as you say, that is not a good choice. It's going to probably do more harm than good.
Yeah, I think if it's the only step, then no. But if it involves multiple different groups, let's call them multiple stakeholders, who would be wise to involve users, the platforms themselves, advertisers, you name it. I mean, think of, again, this is a global thing. This is not one particular country. So has it become too big over time? Probably. Does it do good? Yes, it does. I mean, I can think of examples that don't occur to most people. For instance, the amount of money Facebook invests in areas of the world such as Africa and Southeast Asia, funding the development of internet connectivity in one form or another. They are big contributors to the cost of laying undersea cables that bring internet connectivity to Africa, for instance. So they train people, they do education. So all of those things. Now the critics would say, well, of course they would, because they want people to get Facebook accounts. I mean, that's a cheap answer, frankly.
They're doing other good things.
They are absolutely right. So nevertheless, this is a paradox, really.
Yeah.
And I think there is a serious difficulty here in the 3+ billion people who are connected, and it's not spread evenly either, by the way. But the folks, in our countries, for instance, the millions who use Facebook, why aren't and who criticize it too? So why are they still there? I mean, this is an unanswerable question, I reckon.
Yeah, and then of course there's the fact that I manage our company's social media, and the only way that you can manage a company Facebook page is with a personal account. So there's that. And it's the same situation with Google. For example, I could just go to DuckDuckGo or God
but it's
forbid
not very
Bing.
good.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? But it's not just the search engine, right? Because I talk to my doctor over Google Meet. I use Gmail, which is without any question the best email software as a service tool out there. So how do I leave Google and stop supporting that? They've got us trapped. And especially when it comes to Facebook, where they're not doing the things they should, they could. There are solutions out there to a number of these challenges that simply require investment. And they're not willing to make the investment. They're not willing to eat into their profit, which is huge when you look at the kind of money that Zuckerberg is making in his multiple mansions and buying up the houses in the neighborhood so there's nobody next door to him. Do you need that kind of money? If you consider that these actions are the cost of doing business morally and ethically, and you bake that in and you simply take less profit, not that they're going to suffer, mind you. I mean, he's not going to eat any less well. He won't be able to drive the kind of car that he drives or take the kind of trips that he takes on his private plane. But it would be the right thing to do. And, we kept hearing, I remember, what was his name? He passed away recently. He was the author of that book, Trust Me, PR is Dead, former Edelman executive. Was that companies are just going to start doing the right thing because they're under such a public glare. And it's like these companies just don't care about the public spotlight. They can get away with it, so they're gonna.
Yeah, that's what it looks like, doesn't it, Shel? It's not a pretty picture. So I'd be interested to know, I suppose, people listening to this episode, if anyone has an opinion on this, what do you think? If you're on Facebook, why? And you think they're evil, why? So we'd love to know if you care to share your thoughts with us. So that's kind of dissected that for a bit. Anyway, Shell. Now let's look at the future. And we'll
Future.
say, yeah, this is the first of two topics actually, separate but connected. This one is related to something Gartner does every year. The industry analysts, Gartner, produce a series of hype cycles. And what one appeared, must be now 15 plus years ago, is the hype cycle for emerging technologies. And they tend to publish these around July, August time each year. And sure enough, the 2021 one came out at the end of July. But there's some interesting things about this. Something I always believe communicators need to pay attention to are these tech developments. And at the time this came out first, this was the only one. There were no others. Now there are at least 20 covering specific areas of technology. So the second one we'll talk about is artificial intelligence when we come to that topic later in the show. But this one has some interesting things. If you've not seen the hype cycles before, just Google Gartner hype cycle to get an image of the chart that is now used by many, many people in different ways, because it's very simple to understand. Kind of a wavy line with the vertical axis about expectations and the horizontal axis showing the time that passes. It shows five areas. From the innovation trigger, which is what kicks off something that gets attention and gets talked about and rises up this line to the moment when people realize that it's just a whole lot of hype in their minds. It's called the peak of inflated expectations. And then things drop to the trough of disillusionment, which is where people realize that this truly was a waste of time. It's a South Sea bubble almost. But you then have a slope of enlightenment leading to a plateau of productivity. And you can get the sense of where that travels from something that starts to when it builds up with hype, a bubble bursts, if you like, and it falls down into a trough where there is disillusionment until someone realizes, actually, you know what, this thing is quite good because maybe something has happened in the meantime. And it might scoot out into that slope of enlightenment and reach that plateau, which is widespread use. And that's the goal most of these technologies have, or the people behind them would like to see getting to that plateau. So what Gartner does is look at this over time and applies a value to each of the technologies they mention, showing when it would reach the plateau in their estimation, ranging from less than 2 years through to more than 10 years. There's also a final measure, which I've never actually seen in recent charts on obsolete before the plateau. In other words, events overtook it. I haven't seen that for quite a while. So the emerging tech is pretty interesting because some of these things will be familiar to you. Most of them won't because they are highly technical unless you're working in technology. But there are three particular things that joined the profiles on this year's emerging tech hype cycle according to Gartner, and there are 25 in total in this year. But the three of interest, because we've talked about these on the show, or two of them certainly, non-fungible tokens, and the acronym you'll be more familiar with, no doubt, NFT. Digital humans, that's an interesting one to me, very interesting. It's been hovering around there for a while. Physics-informed AI, that's a very fascinating one as well. I think the acronym is PIAI. You've got to get used to acronyms, by the way. There's lots of them, and abbreviations too, for that matter. But NFTs are one of the ones that Gartner says is definitely on a roll. And in fact, in the process of how hype cycles work, NFTs are currently right at the absolute peak of inflated expectations. And if you've been following NFTs since they first appeared, within the past year, you could probably see why that would be. They've had a lot of build-up, and the innovation trigger was probably those eye-popping stories that emerged within the past year on the digital art, particularly by a guy called Beeple, B-E-E-P-L-E, who sold an artwork for $69 million. You might remember that one. We talked about it on the show, but it was all over the mainstream media for quite a while. It according to Gartner, the way it describes it's quite good. It forms part of an entirely new means of monetization and potentially a whole new digital ecosystem. The signs are there that it's heading that way, hence why it's at the peak of inflated expectations. People begin to think, there's something coming with this. So it's attracting a lot of interest, a lot of attention, a lot more examples, use cases emerging almost daily, and the media coverage is building further. So there it sits at that peak. The trick now is not so much will it get down to the trough. It does. Gravity will do that. It's how quickly it gets out of the trough. Because what happens frequently with these technologies in such a hype cycle is they do plummet down to the trough, but they stay there and they die there typically. But those that scoot out into the slope of enlightenment have all the chances of reaching that plateau. So according to Gartner, NFTs will reach the plateau in 2 to 5 years from now. So we are still in the early days of this, and in fact on that time scale it's done pretty well to reach that peak already. So it could get out there. So NFTs are worth keeping an eye on because they are creating a new kind of marketplace for monetization according to Gartner. It's blockchain based. It's a digital asset. I'm not going to try and explain how it works again, in particular with a blockchain perspective. You've heard us talk about it, mostly Shel, more than me. So go back to the old episodes and you'll find the answer there, is what I would suggest.
Yeah, especially that Saturday Night Live bit where
Right.
the janitor was the one who got it right in about a 20-second sound clip.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So NFTs are definitely one to pay attention to. Gartner split out this year's technology into 3 themes: engineering trust, accelerating growth, and sculpting change. I'm not going to try and go through all of this in an audio podcast, and indeed even in the video on YouTube, because we don't have the graphics to talk you through it, but that's not the purpose of mentioning all of this. The hype cycle chart is definitely worth a look at because all the things that we've talked about are on here. NFTs we mentioned. One to mention specifically, because Shel and I talked about this earlier, in fact, but this is on my mind too, employee communications applications. According to Gartner, that is right up there, almost at the peak. So it's on the innovation trigger upward slope and it's reaching the peak. But employee communication applications like NFTs, according to Gartner, will reach the plateau in 2 to 5 years. So what we're seeing now is still embryonic growth. And you might be wondering, so what are employee communication applications? And it just so happens that I do have a description here. It really looks at a mixture of things. So first off, it's the use of email distribution lists and intranet sites, traditional stuff that's been around for a long time. And people are realizing this is not the future for employee communication applications. Most employee communication applications gaining high levels of interest, according to this article in Business to Community, especially as a means to better reach front things up and what they use them for. Think indeed how they're being used in organizations to achieve specific things. Things are changing. Shel, you've got views on this, I know, because you're embedded in this much more than I am. So what's your take on EACs?
Yeah, employee communications. ECAs, employee communication. Yeah, we have to have an initialism for everything, right? Employee communication apps. I'm not sure I agree with Gartner on this. I don't think that intranets and email are rising up to the peak of inflated expectations. I think the peak of inflated expectations for intranets and emails happened about 25 or 30 years ago.
They're not saying that at all. Not at all. That's just an example of what people are realizing about employee communication applications. Not intranets and emails is what it's saying. So that's not on the chart at all.
You mentioned that they mention intranets and emails. I think these things have just outlived their usefulness.
That's what it says. Exactly.
And in fact, I was on a panel for IABC DC a couple of weeks ago with a cybersecurity expert who said, please stop using email for internal communications. There are better tools out there like Slack and Teams, which I suppose are also part of the ECA category.
I would imagine. Yeah.
And these things evolve and change based largely on what employees are accustomed to in their consumer use of tools and apps. I think something like Teams and Slack are more consistent with what they're using to engage in communication with their friends and families on their mobile devices, and that'll change and then employee communications apps will follow. But for the newer crop of apps, and I'm thinking here of the mobile communication tools, I think, first of all, I am seeing use cases in which outcomes are being delivered that are legitimate and significant. But it all depends on how it's implemented, right? Are you throwing technology at a problem, or are you being strategic and saying this technology helps us solve this problem or helps us achieve this goal? In other words, we're talking about the IABC strategic planning process, right? You start with the goal, you don't start with the tactic. So if you're applying a tactic to a goal in order to achieve a measurable objective, I think it'll be fine. And when it doesn't work anymore, you switch to something else.
Yeah.
I mean, how long have we been using digital signage, and yet that continues to evolve and change. So I see the use of tools like Polite Mail, to give a plug to our sponsor, or Social Chorus, a former sponsor. These things work fine if you use them well, and I just don't see them as being a matter of hype. Now, NFTs, on the other hand, just in the last week, Twitter is going to let people display NFT ownership of high-value virtual goods as part of a new crypto initiative it launched. Dolce & Gabbana, the fashion house, has announced a collection of real-world clothes backed by NFTs that point to assets that are wearable in, are you ready for it, the metaverse, which we just talked about, I think, on the last show.
Yeah, we did.
And even Visa is getting into the act. It bought CryptoPunk, which is an NFT-designed digital avatar, paid $150,000 in Ethereum for it. Their head of crypto said NFTs will play an important role in the future of retail, social media, and entertainment. I guess at least for the next 2 to 5 years, until it finds its way into the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah. I find it very interesting that employee communication applications are on that innovation.
I do too.
They're not at all. I need to be real clear on this. They're certainly not suggesting intranets and email are the main point of this. The article talks about they are not part of this. That's what they're saying.
Okay.
That's what people have been using for years. That's not the future. So
no, it certainly is not.
Right, and it talks at length about how these things are used, how these tools are used, depending on the employee need and the organizational need, the matched twin needs, really. And the examples they give, for instance, is like email is no good to someone on a factory floor. And they give an example, I've moved the page actually, about why Slack wouldn't work in certain circumstances. So a lot depends on what's the right tool for the right people in the right time. So you've got to have that mix. So it requires a new thinking. And clearly it's getting that attention because it's on the innovation tracker, reaching the top of that peak of inflated expectation.
Yeah, and of course you have to consider that I think there's going to be a return to some old technology. I want to launch a print publication.
Yep.
I want to mail it to employees' homes, and I want to do that so we can reach our hourly workers who don't have email addresses.
Right.
They can't get us through technology in any way, shape, or form, but we also want to get into the heads and the hands of families, spouses, and you're not going to do that with technology. You're going to do that with print.
Right. So that's why that's not on the emerging tech hype cycle, because it's not emerging tech. So it'll still have a role, I'm sure. Just moving on to briefly some of the other things that were mentioned here. The one I find really interesting, digital humans. It's an ugly phrase, frankly. It sounds like a good old marketing phrase there. But Gartner has that one. And by the way, just a note, they say that's 10 years out plus, 10 plus years out before it reaches the plateau. That wouldn't surprise me at all. It's not mature. It's not developed. There's a lot of ideas and experiments going on with it. But they do say this about it, which I find quite interesting. They call digital humans digital twin representations of people. And I have no idea what that means until I read the rest of the article. But they're talking about things like avatars, humanoid robots, or conversational user interfaces like chatbots or smart speakers. That's how they're defining that. And that's, by the way, a very concise description. But they say use cases abound for these technologies in HR training, communications, medical care, and customer service, just to give some examples. COVID-19 has pushed the technology potential to enable no-touch experiences, combat social isolation, and provide care to the elderly. Digital humans have appeared in feature films. performed at conferences and acted as brand influencers. Yeah, we've seen stories about that recently. Societal roadblocks and ethical concerns, in addition to immature technologies, create challenges for digital humans, but the potential for business impact and differentiation is pushing some organizations to pursue the technology. That's the driver on the innovation trigger. But 10 years out, this is a long game. So there's more. This is a very lengthy report, by the way, the part that I'm reading. And if you work in a high-tech business with a Gartner account, ask your IT folks, more likely it's them, for a copy if you can. You can read all the details here. But it is interesting, and that hype cycle itself, there are many things on here that we have heard of that are at various stages are on this. I think, to me, it's things like influence engineering. I'm thinking, wow, that's an intriguing one. AI-driven innovation by artificial intelligence, 10 plus years out. And that's at the start of the innovation trigger. Quantum machine learning. I mean, there's some heavy technical stuff here. So get hold of the full report if you want to learn more.
Yeah, the digital humans I find fascinating. We've talked about some elements of this, particularly influencers. But I find, deep fakes, I think, fit into this category. We've talked about
the bad
right.
use.
Well,
Right?
it can be a good use. I imagine a deep fake that a company has created of their own CEO delivering remarks in one of their countries where he doesn't speak the native language,
Sure.
doing it in the native language.
I think it's sunk because of the name, Shell. Deep fake. That's the
Oh
thing.
yeah, no question.
Come up with a new
But
name.
here's one. I just read about this about a week ago. There was a woman who was supposed to be the maid of honor at a wedding, and she couldn't come, something COVID related, but she still delivered the toast at the wedding as a hologram.
Yep,
So
you're going to see more of that.
You're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
Well, some of us in communications have the pleasure, or in some cases, the challenge of working directly with the company's senior leadership. In fact, I was just talking with my associate in WebCore's internal comms department about the executive communication departments you find in larger companies and the kind of work they do. I don't know how many of these executive communicators would sit down with their CEOs and say, sir or ma'am, what you need to do is post more crazy memes on Twitter and the like. But that's what's happening among a group of C-suite occupants, according to an article that ran last week in the Wall Street Journal. The article begins with this description. I'm going to read 2 paragraphs here. The tweet from GameStop corporate director Ryan Cohen on its face made little sense. A picture of a McDonald's ice cream cone alongside a frog emoji. Yet on the February afternoon that he posted it, investors in the video game retailer spun into a frenzy. As traders on social media scrambled to untangle the post's meaning and shared it as a meme, GameStop stock rocketed higher and finished the session up 104%. Mr. Cohen has never publicly revealed the meaning behind the February 24th tweet, and it's impossible to say to what extent it drove GameStop's price movement that day. One thing was clear, a meme lord now occupied the boardroom. There are other executives who've grown cultish followings on platforms like Reddit that include Adam Aron from AMC Entertainment and Elon Musk from, Elon Musk. In online circles, Musk is known as Daddy Elon and the Silverback, and Cohen is called Papa Cohen. In some ways, this whole situation made me laugh, since I remember 10 years ago getting executives to consider posting anything on social media was, let's just say it wasn't easy. Increasingly, though, they've come to understand that social media is where people go for news, and it's an opportunity to reach their constituencies more easily and more quickly than they can through traditional channels. But, memes, according to analysts and experts, pulling off a meme strategy isn't easy, given the randomness and fast-changing attitudes of the internet. This, according to the journal article. In all of these cases, you have to wonder if there are any communicators. Are they participating in these communications? Are they trying to temper the efforts of their CEOs? After all, these memes don't always go well. Elon Musk wound up paying a $20 million fine to settle charges over one of them. But I'm just not sure memes are the most effective way for executive leadership to be communicating.
It's certainly novel, I think. In the shifting sands of how people engage with each other, the move to virtual working more than ever it has been, to the still unknown future of the workplace that we all used to commute to in one form or another, that isn't there anymore. People's behaviors have shifted in terms of how they communicate and what they're communicating about. Formality has gone. Things are more frantic, it seems to me. There's less patience, and there's the ugly side of it all, which is outrage and rage and anger and all that kind of stuff. And in the midst of all of that, we've got to get our messages out to the right people. So memes could be part of that. That's the only kind of way I could think of defining this, because it's not good or bad. To me, it's just another channel if you know how to use it well.
And therein lies the challenge. I'm not sure all these executives know how to use them well. I don't think that they have made studies of social media and the movement of memes and what can happen to one. I think that they see that they work for marketing and are tapping into it. I don't see that they're working with social media specialists on these things. Remember the days when people were saying social media consultants, what a scam? I mean, God, how important would they be now with these executives?
Well, there's my question, really. What's the role of the communicator in it? If we're talking of, large organizations, we mentioned the C-suite, so it's an organization, we'll have communicators. What's the communicator's role? Is this like just the CEO deciding off his own bat, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do something? Is that what's happening here? If so, I don't think that's a good thing. That doesn't look good to me, I have to admit.
Yeah, I also wonder if they're considering their fiduciary obligations and responsibilities legally in the roles that they have in the organization.
Yeah. Some people would be quite naturals at this, I think, and that's good, but that's not universal.
No. Okay, Dan.
Dan goes in there. Yep.
So I'll give a quick plug to his newsletter, and then you can jump into your AI.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. That was an exceptional report. Covered a lot of ground. I did go look at your Twitter profile, and I did see that you have the newsletter on review available to subscribe to, and I did. I clicked that subscribe link, so I'll be getting your newsletter. Looking forward to that and seeing how it goes. But enjoyed the report, Dan.
So now it's just the quick second part of the story, if you will, on what Gartner is predicting. We mentioned emerging technology a little short while ago in this show, and here's the second part, which is about artificial intelligence. Now, AI is something I hear that those two letters being mentioned a lot by people. And this, by the way, isn't the time to explain that it's actually multiple things under that broad umbrella, like machine learning, all that stuff. This is not the purpose of this. It's generally AI is okay. It's moving fast, says Gartner, and we'll be ready for prime time sooner than you think. And I think they're absolutely right with that statement. According to Gartner, companies have 2 to 3 years to lay the groundwork for successful use of what they're calling generative AI. Synthetic data and orchestration platforms. Now, you need to go to Gartner's website to get an explanation of what those terms mean. But the chart they have on this one is equally as interesting as the one on emerging tech. This one's a bit more complete. It does show more potential for beyond the peak of inflated expectations. But the interesting thing to me on this one is that the innovation trigger that I mentioned in the previous report is how things get kicked off. Something triggers awareness of the innovation, and it gets more attention, and it builds up, and it scoots up or slowly progresses, whichever is the reality for a particular technology, up that slope towards the peak of inflated expectations. And the peak is the realization that it doesn't deliver what you thought the promise was, and then it plummets down or slides slowly down into that trough of disillusionment. It may linger there, or something may well suddenly make it, people say, well, hang on a second, this thing it does do this because something's happened, it's been evolved further, or communication was better. And it scoots out from there, and it might make it to the plateau of productivity. And that's the goal of all of these technologies. So AI is broken down in this chart. And again, I mentioned things like machine learning and so forth. They're all mentioned here. And there's lots of these individual elements that make up the broad label of artificial intelligence. Gartner say there are 34 types of AI technologies in this report. It's a big spread. And they say that the AI hype cycle is more fast-paced this year, with an above-average number of innovations reaching mainstream adoption within 2 to 5 years. So that's worth knowing. They found more innovations in the innovation trigger phase of the hype cycle than usual. That means that end users are looking for specific technology capabilities that current AI tools can't quite deliver yet. Synthetic data, orchestration platforms, composite AI, governance, human-centered AI, and generative AI are all in this early phase. So it is quite interesting. They talk about 4 AI mega trends. The first one being companies looking to operationalize AI platforms to enable reusability, scalability, and governance, and speed up adoption. Innovation AI is a second one. That means efficient use of all resources. So multi-experience AI, composite AI, generative AI, and transformers are examples of that trend. Third, responsible AI. That includes explainable AI, risk management, and AI ethics for increased trust, transparency, fairness, and auditability of AI initiatives. And the fourth and final trend, small and wide data approaches enable more robust analytics, and AI reduce organizations' dependency on big data and deliver more complete situational awareness. A lot of stuff there to unpack and get your head around, a lot of multi-syllable words there. This is not a simple topic to understand, but it is part of the future in some form. We see elements of it. We hear about it quite a bit, and some of these tech terms we have heard of. I'm sure many of you have heard of smart robots, knowledge graphs, maybe synthetic data you've heard of, human-centered AI, responsible AI, and so forth, composite AI, multi-experience, etc. All of these technologies, just looking at the chart, only one is 10 plus years out. All of them are either within 2 years, are within 2 to 5 or 5 to 10 years. So this is the future of the next 10 years at work here. Related, 2 documents I came across literally within the last 48 hours. The first one was a document published by the British government that is the strategy for the UK for artificial intelligence in the coming decade. It's a good read. It's available on the UK government website. That's www.gov.uk. And it's called the National AI Strategy. And in fact, the title is National AI Strategy HTML version. I assume they mean the document's the HTML version, not the strategy, right? So they talk about, and of course this is politicians talking here, so take that in mind when you read it, our 10-year plan to make Britain a global AI superpower. So they got this power kick in how they're addressing this, but it is most interesting. It's 53 plus pages. I've not studied it. I've skimmed through it. And I think it's worth looking at this and understanding the role of government in enabling a lot of this. And if you've got a huge driver like this is definitely worth paying attention to. I did look to see if the US government has something similar to this publicly available. I couldn't find anything. But there is a private organization that talks about a national AI strategy in the United States. So there is one, I'm pretty certain. I just couldn't find the link to it. So it might be worth taking a look at both of these and seeing, given the fact that these are 2 allies approaching a similar outlook, I would imagine. Take this into account. This is what I'm doing, certainly, is understanding this in the context of what organizations like Gartner are predicting. And that's private sector, broadly speaking. This is government. This is enabling. This is the enabling approach to it on its own in developing some of these technologies, but also providing the means for others to do that. And I don't mean money necessarily, but things like legislation, laws being passed to do certain things, safeguards being put in place, regulatory frameworks being developed. So all of these things are what you would expect government to do, and this is pleasing to me, certainly, to see the British government producing a public document like this that anyone can get hold of. So it's worth a read. So these are, to my mind, emerging tech and AI are 2 of the areas that an organization like Gartner puts a lot of resources into helping people understand in organizations. One reason why to get the reports will cost you some thousands of dollars. That's a fact. But nevertheless, these are things to pay attention to as communicators. If you're in a large organization in particular, you need to know about these things, if only to understand the meaning of some of these phrases that I tossed out there quite casually in the conversation here. So take a look. There's links in the show notes to the Gartner reports, to the government strategy document. You can download it and take a look. See what you think.
It occurs to me that AI could be a different animal on the Gartner hype cycle than a lot of the other things that they talk about. When a lot of these technologies move over into the trough,
Yep.
they go away, right? They were hot for a while, then everybody said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Look at what we spent on these. They're not making my life better." And the technologies vanish. They never make it onto the was it the slope of enlightenment.
Right.
When AI moves into the trough of disillusionment, it's not going anywhere. This is going to be thoroughly embedded into our lives and pretty much everything that we touch. We may be disillusioned with it, but it's still going to be around, particularly all of these different takes on AI that you listed.
Yeah,
So
you're right. I mean, I think the phrase artificial intelligence certainly is going to be that all these constituent elements will be.
yeah,
These are the, how many did I say there were? 25 or so, or maybe more than that. I can't see it listed here anymore. 34. 34 specific technologies under the umbrella term artificial intelligence. So some, or many, none, who knows? They'll all be sprinkled out and peppered throughout this progress from the peak to the trough to the slope to the plateau. And many of them will be on the plateau. And of course, understanding what that means, that is widespread mass market. That is almost universal adoption. Think about Wi-Fi as a good example. 10 years ago, it was on the peak of inflated expectations, Wi-Fi. And then now it's ubiquitous. That is definitely on a plateau. It's obvious, isn't it? So, and there were critics 10 years ago that said it would never get to this stage. It would be so surpassed by something else that was better. Well, it wasn't.
I'm waiting.
Yeah, and you've got to take into account some of these things too that do make it. Often aren't the best things that make it, but they're the ones that get the adoption. And these are the kind of variables that you might see. I think Gartner does a pretty good job in their predictions over observing all this stuff, particularly the emerging over the last decade. Some of it hasn't gone anywhere. And the interesting to me with Gartner is the stuff that disappears literally just vanishes because they never mention it again. So we don't know what happened to it. Really, just suddenly dropped off the graph. It's almost like, oops, we got that prediction wrong. Let's rub that out quickly. So nevertheless, I think, again, just circling back to the point for me, for communicators, and I'm a communicator, I am very interested in this stuff. I look at it, what impact it has on people and how they live and work, and what impact it has on organizations, on their prosperity and survival or not. In there is all the emotive arguments that have political agendas like no idea on things like the robots are coming to take your jobs, automation, self-driving cars, all that stuff is in there. And the constituent parts of what makes some of that stuff work is under the umbrella term artificial intelligence. And by the way, I like a better term for that when it relates to people, which is augmented intelligence. And I often hijack AI when I'm in conversations with people to talk about this technology augments your intelligence. It lets you do things that you otherwise would not be able to, or certainly not as quick and as accurately as doing it with the help of this technology. So there's ways you can look at this that are quite different.
Yeah, I was happy to see that the chatbots are on the plateau and moving toward the slope of enlightenment because they got a lot of bad rap, but I think that they hold a lot of promise.
I think that the bad rap is just poor use of them, basically.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Also, the early implementation was difficult, and even if you worked hard, they didn't work well. But it's been 100 years since John Maynard Keynes said that technology will lead us to a 15-hour work week, and our biggest challenge will be to figure out what to do with all our leisure time.
Isn't that great?
Well, that's gone down the tubes because work defines us, and it didn't when he was creating that. And now work expands to fill the time that we have.
But you've got,
because we want it to.
Yeah, but you've got moves in recent months I've seen. I think it's Iceland, which has gone to a 4-day week. That's it. Everyone works a 4-day week. Finland's moving that way. I think I'm right. In Ireland, they're going to experiment with that, and there's big talk here in parts of the UK,
It'll
in
never
England.
happen here. Never in a
No,
million years.
I'm sure it won't. It's probably got more chance of happening in Europe because the government's behind a lot of this stuff, although they're talking about how they're going to make up for lost revenue through less taxes. So that's in the picture too.
Yeah, no, here, if you don't work, you're a nobody, right? I mean, this is infusing all of our politics right now. Is,
Yeah,
oh, the reason people aren't working is because their government benefits are taking care of them. We need to get them back to work. Well,
yeah,
where did that 15-hour work week go
yeah.
exactly?
It disappeared completely.
Yeah.
So big picture stuff here, but a lot to unpack, a lot to absorb and understand. So grab the docs if you can.
But one of the things that communicators need to do on a regular basis is share bad news. Externally, we sometimes have to tell investors and other stakeholders things that they don't want to hear. Happens even more internally, where companies have to tell employees bad news. In fact, some companies work hard to keep bad news from employees, which I've always found to be a truly stupid approach to internal communications. But now the Harvard Business School is out with some research about why people tune out bad news, which can be useful to know if it's important to you that people pay attention to that news. Now, a lot of the bad news the research looks at is not what you and I might define as bad news. When I think about bad news, it's we're facing a big lawsuit. The government has announced a recall of our products, an involuntary recall. Our earnings are in the tank. It's something like that. That's not what they're talking about. What they're looking at is the kind of news people don't want to hear because it means they're going to have to change their behaviors. Like, as the post on the Working Knowledge blog explains, that their car exhaust is hurting the planet, or that their jeans were made in a sweatshop, or that their donut might give them diabetes one day. In fact, people often go to great lengths to avoid information that makes them feel bad. The post goes on to say, research has suggested that people tune out negative information so they can plead ignorance and continue harmful behavior. Indeed, it may seem like people are purposely avoiding information in order to create an excuse that frees them from the accountability of their own decisions. Now, according to Christine Exley, an associate professor at Harvard, we find that, yeah, people appear to purposely avoid information about how their decisions affect others. Specifically, they avoid information when it may help them to feel better about their own selfish decisions or decisions that benefit themselves at the expense of others. But, she adds, we also found that a surprisingly large degree of information avoidance doesn't appear related to such excuse-driven motives. So in the study, participants had to choose between options A and B. In one of the tests, they knew that choosing one over the other would benefit them more, but in another they didn't. In fact, they had the ability to avoid information or learn which options were better for them. And as it turned out, most people chose the selfish option in the first instance, and in the second, they avoided information and chose the selfish option there too. According to the post, these results made clear that much of the information avoidance they uncovered in the second version of the experiment was not related to excuse-driven motives. Rather, individuals frequently avoided information for other reasons, such as inattention and laziness. There's more research to come on information avoidance, but knowing that people do that can be really useful to those of us looking to communicate news. Employees or others may not want to hear or may not want to dive into the information in order to learn more, whether it's because they want to be free from accountability for their own decisions or just because they're not interested. I can tell you for sure that it has me rethinking some fundamental internal communication concepts about how we get people to understand a given situation and take responsibility for being part of the solution. I'm working on a blog post of my own on this notion, but it won't be ready until I figure out what it is we have to do different. I know we have to do something different. I haven't figured out what it is yet. By the way, as long as we're talking about how people process news, I should note that the Pew Research Center is out with its news consumption report for 2021, which found that about half of Americans get their news on social media at least sometimes, down slightly but not appreciably from 2020. Nearly a third get their news regularly on Facebook, which, given our earlier discussion, is just terrifying. While other sites like Reddit, TikTok, LinkedIn, and the like are less likely to be regular news sources. On Twitter, though, 55% of users regularly get their news there. And I guess if that news requires them to change their behaviors, then they ignore it.
There's some eye-opening stuff there, Shel, I have to say. It is interesting. Listen to how you were describing you know, the behaviours of what people do to avoid news. It isn't surprising, I suppose. That's a human behaviour, isn't it? So I suppose part of the solution to that in an organisational context is changing the bit you're trying to figure out, I suppose, really, how you make it available and what is the information that you're communicating. I mean, that surely has got to be. Isn't that how it should work?
Well, I think part of it hinges on managers, because we know that people listen to their managers. We know that managers don't like sharing information. There's been research on that. But we also know that companies don't really hold them accountable. We tell them it's important, but do we knock down the size of their bonus over it? Do they get bad performance reviews over it? No, we hold them accountable for productivity and profitability and things like that. Quality to some extent. I think that if we want people to start paying attention to this stuff, we have to revisit manager accountability for communicating with their employees and paying attention to the things that the leadership wants them to communicate to their team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And of course, we're at a time of radical change in the workplace with regard to what we've just been through over the past 2 years and the unknowns that are coming at us over the next year, 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, and people aren't looking at the information on that either. I suspect that's part of the information avoidance that we're looking at is leaders and managers paying attention to what the threats and risks are in the changing workplace.
Okay. So that actually leads quite nicely into a sort of related story that we could plug into this, which is a survey conducted in the US by the Society for Human Resource Management that, as they say here, to shed light on the perceived conditions of workplace culture and its impact on working Americans. So some interesting findings in this survey. Certainly opened my eyes a bit on the disconnect in organizations where, according to the survey results, leaders and human resources people in companies said that corporate culture was terrific during the pandemic, and employees at the companies said no, it wasn't. A bit of a disconnect there, it seems to me. The survey was conducted, it covered the time period from the start of the COVID-19 pandemic up till recently. They don't specify the dates in this Forbes article that summarized it. But the highlights are interesting, Shel. According to this, nearly 100% of all HR professionals agree that they encourage a culture of open and transparent communication. About 72% of executives, vice president and higher in rank, report that their overall organizational culture has improved since the beginning of the pandemic. Only 21% of HR and 14% of Americans agreed with the executive's assessment. Okay, there's a first disconnect there. From an employee's point of view, most of the respondents to the survey were not so thrilled about the way things are going. Over 25% did not believe that managers encourage transparency. About 34% of Americans claimed that their managers don't know how to lead a team. And over 25% said that their company doesn't provide leadership training, which would ameliorate the situation, says Forbes. That's pretty startling, I think, those metrics. Disturbingly, says Forbes, over half of working Americans that left a job in the past 5 years due to workplace culture indicated that the main reason for the departure was because of their relationship with their manager. Only 22% stayed at a job because of their manager. There's another not good metric. Many employees did not feel engaged with their work tasks and dread going to work, quote unquote. Remote workers reported feeling isolated or disconnected and worried that others thought they weren't working hard enough. See, that's something I think that we're paying a lot more attention to now, is that the change due to the pandemic in particular has upset things hugely in organizations from what has been established and what everyone knows worked well for decades, if not longer. Suddenly it's different. People aren't in the workplace, they're remote. And that's, I guess, the first year was the transition to that, and things like, buying new equipment, desks and all that stuff, who pays for it and all that kind of stuff. And the kind of family work-life balance was completely out of balance as people got used to all this. Now it's kind of settled. Things are emerging generally in an organization. Culture is shifting because not everyone is in the workplace anymore. And there's separate studies on this, and you've probably seen a lot of them, Shel, I'm sure, that talk about poor workplace culture as a consequence of the pandemic. I'm not quite sure it's as neat to describe it like that, but surely it would impact it. But it is interesting. It mentions remote workers. Nearly half of the ones who were surveyed, 44% in fact, who worked remotely at least some of the time, reported feeling isolated or disconnected. We see that mentioned a lot. 43% indicated that they worry other people don't think they're working hard enough while being remote. Women indicated more negative effects of poor workplace culture compared to men. But the big picture that Forbes concludes with talks about that the survey results indicate that positive organizational culture keeps employees engaged. However, unfortunately, says Forbes, more than half of the managers and HR professionals agreed that it has been difficult to maintain that culture during the pandemic. There's a bit of a paradox here, Shel, in the way Forbes concludes this. I'm not sure I agree with this. They say that makes sense and is reasonable, according to Forbes. The last 2 years have been very difficult. Corporate leaders had to contend with the virus outbreak, transition people to remote work, ensure that the technology are available to keep people connected and conduct business in a completely new environment. It's understandable that HR professionals and other employees indicate issues with communication, altered workloads, and employees voluntarily leaving their companies as primary reasons for negative change in workplace culture during the pandemic. I don't think I agree with that. I don't think I do. I need to think about that a bit more, but that doesn't really fit with what the survey results are showing. So it's an interesting picture. I did reach out to some friends in large organizations who are involved in internal communication, ones in HR. Is this what the picture they see in the UK? Is this similar? And the answer to that was no, not really. So I thought that's interesting. I did ask in a tweet to my followers if anyone had any views on that. I didn't hear from anyone, so I just got the US picture here. I wouldn't be surprised if this does reflect the picture in the UK to a certain extent, I think. I think the point, though, is that workplace culture is a tenuous thing, it seems to me, that is sensitive to, well, like most things, to huge shifts in that workplace. And the workplace has shifted, right? It is no longer that place that you used to spend 2 hours a day going into London to work and then 2 hours coming home again. I know people who will not go to work again for a company if they have to do that. I've got other friends who are quite happy to do that. So, it's not a sit thing. The point is, though, I think that we're in a huge transition. This is a consequence of all the changes, I think. And it's a fundamental element of the employer-employee relationship. And I think this is something to be concerned about, that you've got these findings. But I think maybe more importantly, that you've got this huge disconnect between what leaders and HRs think and what employees think.
The disconnect doesn't surprise me. I remember several years ago, there was a study, if I remember correctly, they surveyed 100 executives, 100 HR people, and 100 employees frontline, and asked who drives culture, and executives said we do, HR people said we do, and the front line said we do. So there are different perceptions of culture. Maintaining culture in the pandemic has been a singular challenge when you consider that culture is shaped largely by shared experience.
Okay.
And when we went to the office, the shared experience was in your face. It was obvious. Right? Not so much when you're working from home and just doing Zoom. You didn't have the opportunity to bump into people in the halls. You didn't have the celebrations for a new patent or, as we do in construction, achieving a TCO, a temporary certificate of occupancy, which is sort of the end milestone of building a new structure. Everything is happening virtually, and the shared experience is tamped way down. And that's a challenge. How do you maintain that shared experience in order to drive the culture and the employee experience in a way that is consistent with what you have been working towards for all these years? Now, one good thing, at least executives are actually talking about culture. There was a time when that was, the foo-foo artsy craftsy stuff that our HR people deal with, not us. So it's good to see executives dealing with it, even if they're dealing with it badly. I saw a study from O.C. Tanner Institute that found during the worst of the COVID-19 crisis, when a company had a layoff or a furlough, there was a 91% decline in the employee net promoter score. That is, will you recommend this company to a friend or colleague? A 57% increase in disengagement, a 42% increase in a tense workplace atmosphere, and a 75% increase in feeling like the organization was underprepared. But yeah, I see all the stories about CEOs patting themselves on the back for going all in with culture during the pandemic. At the same time, their employees are leaving in droves as part of this great resignation.
Changing time, Shel. That's as simple as that. I think the workplace as we knew it is not with us, and yet I can tell you,
and we don't know what it's going to be.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's in flux.
Yeah, I get disagreement to that view from many. I think no. I even hear things like no. It's just on pause. Everyone's going to come back to the office and be like it was. No, it won't ever be like it was. You might get a lot of people going back to an office, depending on so many different factors. I mean, let's not forget one thing: there are some professions and occupations you can't do remotely. And they're not just the obvious things like, well, I got a machine, I got to pull levers on and press buttons on.
Fireman, I'm going to fight that fire from my house.
Right, there's healthcare. I mean, there's many things. Yet the notion of hybrid working makes a lot of sense to me, because that suggests recognition that you need to evolve and change something, and you're going to try and do it in a way that works for everyone. I don't hear anymore. I did hear some months ago reports even of organization leaders being quoted in the mainstream media publicly as saying, no, we're absolutely no way we're going to put up with this home working malarkey. We'll get everyone back to the office. And there are some who still say that, in which case say that they're doomed. They will not survive. The ones
their employees will go work for companies that don't do
that's
that.
already happening. I mean, I hear all this about this great resignation, mostly going on in the US. But
I should say the
know a few people who've done
employable.
that.
Yeah.
Sorry?
The employable employees are the ones who are going to leave and go elsewhere. These companies are going to be left with the mediocrity that can't find other jobs.
The deadbeats, yeah. It's times of serious change that are with us, and who knows where all this is going.
I mentioned before the UK company Reward Challenge that came up with its matrix about when you should be in the office and when you should be at home, and leave it to the judgment of the employee. But there are certainly times, I mean, face-to-face meetings, when they are necessary, do produce value. Or celebrations, right? But if you're going to be head down, I mean, I hear companies who are going to mandate 3 days in the office. And it has to be the same 3 days if you work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can't come in the next week and work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, right? This is ridiculous. So what if I'm spending the entire week editing video? I need to come into the office on 3 particular days for that? Right. Give me a break.
Yeah. Well, I've heard, it's not anecdotal, I heard it directly from someone I know who said that he's discovered that the kind of return to work plan at his employer to him means that, okay, they want me to come in the office 3 days a week and I'm going to be sitting there in Zoom calls. Why do I have to come into the office to do that? It's a valid question, it seems to me. It's probably metaphorical, meaning that he's coming in to do the kind of work that doesn't require you to go to an office to do it. So
exactly.
Doesn't make much sense to me. So we're in for a period of, I think, pain a lot for many organizations. So there we are.
Yep, and it has been another hefty but good episode for immediate release. It is monthly, so you can listen to this over the course of the month. You don't have to sit and listen to it all at once, but we will be back next month on October 18th. We will be recording on Saturday, the 16th of October. And we welcome you to listen in. We do publish in the show notes the YouTube URL where you can watch us and even send us comments and observations. We didn't have anybody doing that this month, which is fine. But if you would like to, you're more than welcome. We also do our FIR Zoom chat on Thursdays. We didn't do one last week because everybody who normally participates was unavailable. So I sent an email to Bill Spaniel and I said, we're not doing it. Chip's not there. Neville's not there. Dan's not there. I'm busy, so we'll be back. But if you would like to participate on one of these, they are at 1 p.m. No, they are not. They are at, they are 1 p.m. Eastern time on Thursdays for about 30 minutes, just random chit chat.
6 p.m. UK time.
Right. And if you would like the credentials for those, just drop an email to us. You should also drop an email to us about anything that you think we should talk about on the show or your reaction to anything that we have talked about. That email address is fircomments@gmail.com. Attach up to a 3-minute audio file if you'd like us to play it. You can record a comment directly from the FIR website. There's a send voicemail tab on the right-hand side of the page. Click record. You've got, I think, 90 seconds. If you need more than that, record 2. I'll stitch them together. Leave a comment directly on the show notes for this episode at firpodcastnetwork.com. Share your thoughts on the FIR community on Facebook. And we are always appreciative of your reviews on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And I have been adding FIR to all the different places where you can get podcasts these days. So wherever you get them, ratings and reviews, deeply appreciated. So until October, that will be a 30 for immediate release. Stop recording.
Right. Hit the stop
Quickly
button.
save.
Cool.
Great.
Yep.
Hey, I had one thing to mention. I sent you an email about a possible FIR interview. Did you see that?
Did I miss that?
Let me tell you about it.
When did you send it?
It would have been around the 21st.
Okay.
This is from this was a unsolicited pitch from a PR guy, but it sounded interesting. A new study published in the Journal of Public Interest Communication suggests that when communicators use narrative-based messaging when communicating with legislators, that this messaging can either challenge or even diminish a legislator's support for a particular policy decision, which is contrary to what most communicators think, that everything has to be a story and a narrative. So I thought interviewing the researchers would be interested. I just wanted to know if you wanted to participate or if I should do that one on my own.
I've got your email. I didn't see it when it came. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But I think
I told them I was interested and that I was reaching out to you. So
yeah, I think you should do this one your own.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah, I think
I'll look at the study and I'll. Okay, yeah. No problem.
I'll promote it when you've done it.
Sounds good.
So okay, so I guess we're done then. So I'll send you the recording.
Right, I'll have it up on Monday morning. I'll send you the promo art tomorrow when I do the production.
Okay. Sounds a plan.
And yeah,
Good.
That's that.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm only going to have dinner now, so.
I'm going to a concert tonight, so I'm looking forward to that.
I booked tickets, by the way, for Laura and I to go and see the Bond movie. So
have you? I want to see it.
It does entice us back to the cinema. First cinema visit in 2 years.
Yeah, it'll be ours too.
I talked,
and Michelle's still dicey about it.
Yeah, I talked to the theatre manager and learned a lot about what they've done over the past year to, social distancing, special stuff in the air conditioning system, changes the air far more frequent than it used to, and other things too. So feel a little more confident. We're still going masked up and
Oh
gelled
yeah.
up. Yeah, the works.
Hey, if I could be on a plane for 6 hours masked up, I can be in a theater for 2.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a calculated risk. So if we get something, then a lot of people will probably get it
Well, I'm
too.
also going to be getting the booster that they just approved
Yeah,
for
that's
over
online
65.
here. Online here too.
Benefits of being a senior citizen is
You got
you
it.
get this.
We're lined up for that as well. Tomorrow we're actually getting our seasonal flu jab.
Yeah, we are too, actually,
Yeah,
going over to the CVS pharmacy for that.
yeah. So that's good. And then comes the
And I
booster.
did get tested. Michelle and I got tested when we got back from Hawaii, negative, because I
Yep.
had to go to the office on Thursday and I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to go infected.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right.
So
So I think
tell Laura we're coming in a year.
yeah, I will. So on the Bond movie, it releases here on the 30th. So I think you don't get it till about the 8th of October, right? In
Right.
the US. Yeah, I mean we're going to
Yeah,
say I think on the 5th, on Tuesday the 5th.
it
We're
looks
going to see it.
good.
It does. It's long. I mean, 2 hours and something.
Yeah.
But plus all the previews you get as well. I mean, I like going for that whole experience. The
Oh, I do
previews,
too.
what's coming. Yeah, Laura's not so keen on that, but we do it.
And
But
it'll be interesting to see who will be the next Bond because there will be one.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
looking forward to it. Alrighty,
All right.
I'll send you the recording shortly, and then we're good. I'll talk to you on
The 16th.
Thursday.
Oh, this coming Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're yeah,
Okay.
good.
Good to talk to you.
Likewise. Take care. Hi to Michelle, and
Hi, did Laura.
we'll get. I've got it in my diary, mid-September next year. Just let me know more when you know more. And
Absolutely.
we'll look up on the map where we are. We're down near Newbury, Thatcham, near Newbury. It's about 55 miles further out from London. So, in fact, where we were before was only 25 miles, so it's double the distance.
Yeah, I don't care if we get to London. You always
No.
take us to interesting places.
Oh, we'll figure out something in this part of England.
Right.
Yep. Lost a plan.
Okay.
Good.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Shel.
All right.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Yeah. Bye.